Yeah, and the response on the left was interesting. It was basically not touched for a couple of days. And then Tech Dirt, kind of an industry blog, kind of jumped out and attacked it. I want to talk about that next.
I had to kind of like compare things because it's such a long response from Tech Dirt. But you're probably able to kind of pick it apart right away. What was your reaction to the Tech Dirt rebuttal, alleged rebuttal?
It's a really, really long screed. And you're like, wow, this guy's really having a good time. But then you look closer at it, you're like, wait, there's actually nothing here.
That's what I thought.
He doesn't have anything to say. So we could read some of it here. I don't know if we have it in the teleprompter, but I can also read it from here too. So like, for instance, he writes, the article is garbage. And I usually wouldn't focus on a blog in an industry publication. But what's happened is a bunch of progressives were just sharing it, and I think without reading it, being like, good. I was right to be able to ignore this. Now it's fake news. I don't have to talk about this.
Right, and that's exactly what it was. It was like the release valve.
Yeah, fake news.
Yep, and
you're fake news.
I will also say I think it warrants a response because I actually think, maybe you disagree, that it was written in good faith. I mean, it is a screed, but he says he's a fan of The Intercept usually, and I think he tried to engage with the substance, but his failure, I think, to rebut the substance was extremely telling.
Because his fundamental problem is that there's a contradiction, and you'll see this as I read this here. He says a couple of different things. One, he says this is a nothing burger. He gives a giant nothing burger, nothing new here. This is all old news. Tries to dress up old news as a big bombshell, but actually we all knew all of this stuff. And then he also says, and it ought to be retracted.
He does say that. Yeah.
It's like, well, it can't be both. Like, it's either old news and a nothing burger, or it's false and should be retracted. And then he's like, and a lot of the interactions that you describe between the tech companies, the tech platforms, and the government are actually good. So he's like, it's a nothing burger, it's false and should be retracted, and also it's false and it's good.
Where it's not false, it's good, right? Yeah, like, oh sure, this stuff exists, we've just known about it forever, and by the way, we need to monitor people. And
so he writes, the article is garbage. It not only misreads things, it is confused about what the documents reporters have actually say, and presents widely available, widely known things as if they were secret and hidden when they were not. So the entire article is a complete nothing burger, blah, blah. He says, let's dig in. Back in 2018, then President Donald Trump signed the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency Act into law, creating the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency as a separate agency in DHS. While there are always reasons to be concerned about government interference in various aspects of life, CISA was pretty uncontroversial, perhaps with the exception of when Trump freaked out and fired the first CISA director, Chris Krebs, for pointing out that the election was safe and there was no evidence of manipulation or foul play. He says, while CISA has a variety of things under its purview, one thing that it is focused on is general information sharing between the government and private entities. This has actually been really useful for everyone, even though the tech companies have been quite reasonably cautious about how closely they'll work with the government because they've been burned before. Indeed, as you may recall, one of the big revelations from the Snowden documents was about the PRISM program, which turned out to be oversold by the media reporting on it, but was still problematic in many ways. Since then, the tech companies have been even more careful about working with the government, knowing that too much government involvement will eventually come out and get everyone burned. So he's saying, and later he makes this point over and over in this long piece, that the tech platforms are doing a good job of resisting the government pressure.
That's the best part.
But there is no government pressure. Well, it's like, hey, buddy, what are they resisting?
Right, and that's the other thing. Like, do you not know how reporting works? You report this stuff because it's relevant to what it could become. Right, so like in its early stages, in its infancy, we should be so lucky as to catch tech executives, like some of the ones that are texting. There's text messages in the Intercept piece, and government officials even flirting with ideas that are this like authoritarian.
I think, and if the government wants to influence the public debate, they should just do it the normal way, have their spokesperson put out public statements, put out data. I'm glad the CDC puts out a lot of data, put out more data, put out all the raw data. Like, that's your role if you want to do that. The behind the scenes meetings, emails, portals, that's not, and that's what, and we can put this ACLU thing up later. That's the point. You can't use private entities to get around the First Amendment. Just read one more paragraph. So this is all.
I mean,
all
you
at the
very
top.
much can.
Yeah. He says, with that in mind, CISA's role has been pretty widely respected with almost everyone I've spoken to, both in government at various companies. How is this a debunking of the story? So he's spoken to a bunch of people in government and at various companies. He says, it provides information regarding actual threats, which has been useful to companies, and they seem to appreciate it. This is what this guy's writing.
Like the Colorado account's actual threats.
Yes.
The guy with Lucifer in the profile picture, in the banner picture, who literally identifies himself as a parody account when you go to the account, has no followers.
This is practically a parody article. He then says, given their historical distrust of government intrusion and their understanding of the limits of government authority here, the companies have been pretty attuned to any attempt at coercion, and I've heard nothing regarding CISA at all. What?
The Facebook portal was something that, again, like he uses it, and this is one of the things when the Intercept report, I think, lays out in most disturbing detail. At TechDirt, they're saying, listen, that Facebook portal, the Meta portal, where government officials can easily just drop anything they think constitutes disinformation in there. And at one point in the TechDirt article, he says, and only 35% of the complaints from the government are like, nobody does anything about, 75% of them. Just that 35%, that's a huge freaking number.
Yeah.
Am I wrong? Yeah. 35%?
And it should be public.
It should.
Yeah. And later he says, he accuses us of using a blurry version of meeting minutes.
Yes.
When the actual meeting minutes were public. And it's basically, he's concocting some conspiracy that we would like blur the minutes so it looked like we got something. And he's like, here are the minutes. I found them by Googling. It's like, go read the minutes. Those are different than the ones that we publish.
Oh, they're actually different?
They're different.
Oh my gosh.
And he updated, he didn't correct, he updated his piece and said like, yeah, okay, fine.
So,
here's it, he says, updated. To note that not all of the meeting minutes published by The Intercept were public. They include a couple of extra subcommittee minutes that are not on the CISA website. Like, so, okay, thank you, like, for correcting your piece.
Updating it.
Yeah, updating his piece. Did not update his tweets about it. Oh, so anyway, do we
Elon hasn't let him yet.
Do we have Edward Snowden here? So then he got Then he got all mixed up in a fight with Edward Snowden, who was like, what are you doing? I think that's C3. Is that right?
I don't know. I don't know if we actually have it. Yeah.
Oh.
Okay.
No,
so
C3. Oh yeah. Well, I'll read this one too. So this is the part here. So the next paragraph to the Intercept piece then provides an email that kind of debunks the entire framing of the article. Quote: platforms have got to get comfortable with government. It's really interesting how hesitant they remain. Microsoft executive Matt Masterson, a former DHS official, texted Jen Easterly, a DHS director, in February.
That is so inappropriate.
Right. And then he writes, Masterson had worked in DHS on these kinds of programs and then moved over to Microsoft. But here he's literally pointing out that the companies remain hesitant to work too closely with the government, which is exactly what we've been saying all along. Again.
But a Microsoft executive isn't.
Right. A Microsoft executive isn't. And what are they hesitant about? They are hesitant about what the government is doing. What is the government doing? The government is creeping into their space. Content moderation is extraordinarily difficult, and I don't want to say that this is easy stuff, but we don't need the government engaged in the content moderation process. Mm-hmm. And the tech platforms are hesitant, not of nothing, they're hesitant of something. They're resisting something. What are they resisting? They're resisting the exact thing that this guy described in the article. But the thing is, he doesn't find anything wrong with it, which is fine. That's his opinion. He can have that opinion.
Yeah, and he seems to have just taken umbrage viscerally with the idea that like he already knew a bunch of this stuff because
you can't step on somebody's
guy.
beat. I've learned that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think that's actually what was a huge part of why he wrote this. It seemed that he was saying like, I knew all of this, and we in this community knew all of this.
And we're cool with it.
But one thing,
and my sources are cool that I talk to people at the companies and I talk to people at the government. They all think this is fine.
Yeah, he says.
What's the big deal here?
He says if you look at the actual details, it shows some fairly basic and innocuous information sharing with nothing even remotely looking like pressure on the companies to take down information. But the bottom line here is that happens all of the time in media and reporting, and it has to, because everyone can't pay attention to every detail all at once. So you have to lay out things that are maybe sort of public on some database, government database that only industry people ever pay attention to, which is how they bury a lot of this, and it's how a lot of people never know. I mean, go to the FARA database, go to FARA.gov, type in any random country, and click on one of the disclosures, and you will learn a hell of a lot as a private citizen that the media is not telling you. These things just sit on government databases, and you need to then flesh it out in reporting to, like, that's what I want as a reader. That's what readers want. They want it all sort of put in one place on a long article like that, which must have been some 3,000 words. That's just a guess.
Yeah. And so is the next element the ACLU one?
I don't know if we have that one.
If we don't have it, I'll just read it. It says the ACLU, in response to our story, said the First Amendment bars the government from, thank you, from deciding for us what is true or false online or anywhere. Our government can't use private pressure to get around our constitutional rights. And so it comes down to the question then of what is pressure? Yep. And is a phone call, a conference call from the Department of Homeland Security to a company pressure?
Yes.
He seems to think it's not just helpful government, but at the same time they're resistant to it. Well, so what are they resistant to? They're resistant to pressure. According to the ACLU, this is something that the government cannot do around the First Amendment.
And our tips dropped into a government database by government officials en masse pressure. Right. Yes, because they're coming from the government that has power to regulate you.
If the government wants to do that publicly, then they should do that publicly. If they have some massive national security thing, like, hey, just FYI, somebody published the nuclear codes, well, fine, okay. Also, change your nuclear codes.
We'll do that too. You get the two-factor verification.
Two-factor on your nuclear weapons. Like, it's important.
At the bare minimum. Yeah. But before we jump off of the segment, I want to say one final thing, which is I think the foundational issue here is a foundational issue in our society, period, which is that identity politics have been exploited by oligarchs and by powerful people to abuse our rights and to encroach on our rights, which is to say they use identity politics to expand the definition of what constitutes hate, what constitutes disinformation. And I'm not saying this is the case always, but it is part of it, that they have been able to expand the definition of what constitutes disinformation, what constitutes hate speech, what constitutes bigotry and incitement to a level that implicates ordinary people across the political spectrum and encroaches on their rights and allows the government to encroach on their rights. And until we can find consensus definitions for those terms, we haven't always had them, but until we can come back to a place where we have consensus definitions on those terms, we're going to continue to be, that's going to be exploited by powerful people from here on out.
But the attempt to arrive at these consensus decisions should not involve the government. And it certainly should not involve the Department of Homeland Security.
Right, behind closed doors, unelected people, absolutely not.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.